Welcome to Compact History from compacthistories.com, where we explore the stories, events, and moments that shape the world. In short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 133, The History of Warships. For most of human history, the warship was simply a working vessel adapted to carry warriors. Early Egyptian reliefs depict ships transporting soldiers along the Nile, while the maritime communities of the Eastern Mediterranean used vessels for raiding, trade protection, and conquest. By the Late Bronze Age, however, ships were being designed specifically to fight. They were becoming faster, narrower, and better suited to maneuvering against an enemy fleet. The principal weapon of the ancient warship was not carried on its deck. It was built into its bow. A projecting timber ram, often strengthened with bronze, allowed a crew to punch through an opponent's hull or smash its banks of oars. Success depended upon speed, discipline, and the ability to turn rapidly. Battles could still end with soldiers boarding enemy vessels, but skillful commanders attempted to disable ships before their crews came within fighting distance. Phoenician shipbuilders helped develop the trireme, which arranged oarsmen on two levels. The Greeks later perfected the trireme, with 3 banks of oars and a crew that commonly included about 170 rowers. These men were not chained slaves in the classical Greek navies, as later popular culture often suggested. Many were citizens or paid professionals whose careful coordination gave the ship its speed and agility. The trireme reached the height of its importance during the wars between the Greek city-states and the Persian Empire. At Salamis in 480 BC, a Greek fleet commanded by Themistocles fought the more numerous Persian navy in confined waters. The narrow straits restricted Persian movement, allowing the Greeks to attack disordered enemy formations. The victory prevented Persia from using its fleet to support its army, and demonstrated that command of the sea could determine the outcome of a war on land. Rome initially possessed less naval experience than Carthage, its great rival in the Western Mediterranean. During the First Punic War, beginning in 264 BC, the Romans constructed large fleets and relied heavily upon boarding tactics. They are traditionally associated with the corvus, a bridge that could be dropped onto an enemy deck, allowing Roman infantry to fight almost as if they were on land. Although the device's importance remains debated, Rome eventually overcame Carthage and established control over the Mediterranean. Larger vessels appeared during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, including quinqueremes carrying more oarsmen and heavily armed boarding parties. Yet size did not guarantee victory. At Actium in 31 BC, the lighter ships commanded by Octavian's admiral Agrippa defeated the fleet of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, helping Octavian become the undisputed ruler of Rome. Ancient naval traditions survived in the Byzantine dromon, a swift-oared warship that could employ missiles, boarding troops, and the incendiary substance known as Greek fire. Elsewhere, Viking longships combined oars and sails to carry raiders across seas and up shallow rivers. These vessels were formidable, but they still belonged to an age in which sailors fought at close range. The appearance of gunpowder at sea would eventually allow warships to destroy one another from a distance. Cannon began appearing aboard European ships during the 14th century, although the earliest weapons were small, unreliable, and dangerous to their own crews. Initially placed on upper decks or mounted in temporary structures, they supplemented archers and boarding parties rather than replacing them. Their potential increased when shipbuilders began cutting gunports into hulls, allowing heavier cannon to be positioned closer to the waterline. Ocean-going designs also improved. Carracks carried large cargoes and supported high forecastles and sterncastles, while the more streamlined galleon combined sailing performance with concentrated firepower. European expansion into the Atlantic and Indian Oceans gave these vessels a strategic role. Warships could protect trade, attack coastal settlements, and maintain contact with overseas possessions thousands of miles from home. England's Mary Rose, launched in 1511, reflected this changing approach. She carried guns of several sizes and underwent substantial rebuilding before sinking during an engagement with a French fleet in 1545. Later in the century, English ships used comparatively long-range gunnery and maneuverability against the Spanish Armada. The Armada's defeat in 1588 was not the result of a single decisive battle, but it showed that naval cannon, sailing ability, weather and logistics could matter more than attempts to board. By the 17th century, increasingly powerful broadside batteries encouraged fleets to fight in line ahead. Each ship followed the vessel in front, allowing it to fire without friendly ships obstructing its guns. The formation produced the term ship of the line, referring to a warship sufficiently strong to take its place in the main battle fleet. Formal instructions introduced during the Anglo-Dutch Wars helped turn this practice into established doctrine. These ships were floating communities as well as weapons. Hundreds of sailors operated sails, loaded cannon, repaired battle damage, and kept the vessel functioning during months at sea. Gun crews had to sponge out barrels, load powder and shot, run the cannon forward and fire through the gun port. A trained crew could achieve a much faster rate of fire than an inexperienced opponent, making discipline as important as the number of guns. The largest first-rate ships carried at least 100 cannon and crews approaching 850 men. More numerous were third-rates, particularly the 74-gun two-decker, which offered a practical balance between firepower, cost and sailing performance. Smaller frigates usually carried their principal guns on one deck. Too lightly armed for the battle line, they performed scouting, escort and commerce raiding duties, which also shows that some naval roles were starting to become specialized. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain's extensive dockyards, financial resources and trained manpower allowed the Royal Navy to maintain fleets across the world. At Trafalgar in 1805, Admiral Horatio Nelson broke the Franco-Spanish line and secured a victory that removed the immediate threat of invasion. Yet, even Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory, represented a technology approaching its limits. Steam engines, explosive shells and iron armour were about to make the wooden battle fleet obsolete. The Industrial Revolution transformed almost every part of the warship. Steam engines freed vessels from total dependence upon wind, while iron construction allowed shipbuilders to create larger and stronger hulls. Rifled artillery increased the range and accuracy of naval guns, and explosive shells threatened to turn wooden ships into blazing wrecks. These innovations did not arrive in a neat sequence. For several decades, navies produced hybrid vessels combining sails, steam engines, timber, iron, and competing arrangements of guns. Early steamships used paddle wheels mounted on their sides. These occupied valuable space, interfered with broadside batteries, and were vulnerable to enemy fire. The screw propeller offered a better solution because it sat beneath the waterline and left the ship's sides available for guns. By the 1840s and 1850s, screw-driven warships were appearing in the major European fleets, although many retained masts and sails to conserve coal on long voyages. Armour became urgent after the development of guns capable of firing explosive shells into wooden hulls. During the Crimean War, French armoured floating batteries survived Russian fire while attacking coastal fortifications at Kinburn in 1855. France then launched Gloire in 1859, the first ocean-going ironclad warship. Britain responded with HMS Warrior, launched in 1860. Built with an iron hull, protected by wrought iron armour and driven by both steam and sail, she was larger and more powerful than her French rival. She was also overtaken remarkably quickly as naval technology accelerated, with Royal Museum's Greenwich recording that Warrior had already been surpassed by 1864. The first battle between ironclads occurred during the American Civil War. In March 1862, the Confederate ironclad Virginia attacked wooden Union warships at Hampton Roads before encountering USS Monitor. The low-sided Union vessel mounted 2 guns inside a rotating turret, allowing it to fire without turning the entire ship. Their engagement was tactically inconclusive, but the worldwide attention it received confirmed that wooden warships could no longer dominate naval warfare. Designers experimented with turrets, central batteries and guns mounted in barbettes. Masts gradually disappeared as steam engines became more reliable, while iron gave way to stronger steel. Armour was concentrated around machinery, magazines and gun positions rather than spread evenly across the hull. Naval guns grew so large that only a few could be carried, but hydraulic and mechanical systems allowed them to be loaded, trained and fired. A second threat came from the self-propelled torpedo, successfully developed by Robert Whitehead during the 1860s. Small torpedo boats could theoretically sink warships many times their size. Navies responded by constructing fast vessels known as torpedo boat destroyers, later shortened simply to destroyers. Submarines and naval mines added further dangers beneath the surface. By the end of the 19th century, the typical battleship had a steel hull, steam propulsion, thick armour, and a mixture of large and medium-caliber guns. These vessels became known retrospectively as pre-dreadnoughts. Japan's destruction of Russia's Baltic fleet at Tsushima in 1905 highlighted the value of speed, accurate long-range fire, and centralized control. The lesson appeared clear. Battleships needed uniform batteries of the heaviest possible guns. Britain was already constructing the vessel that would embody that idea. When HMS Dreadnought entered service in 1906, she rendered existing battleships outdated almost overnight. Her main battery consisted of 10 12-inch guns, giving her a far heavier long-range broadside than ships carrying mixed calibers. Steam turbines provided a speed of about 21 knots, allowing her to outrun most earlier battleships. Armour, firepower and speed were combined in a design that gave its name to an entirely new category of warship. The all-big gun concept was not exclusively British. Japan and the United States were considering similar ideas, and the American South Carolina class was designed independently. Britain nevertheless completed Dreadnought first, partly because Admiral Sir John Fisher drove the program forward. Construction took just over a year, an extraordinary achievement intended to demonstrate the capacity of British shipyards. The problem was that the new ship also reduced Britain's existing advantage. Every pre-dreadnought was now considered second class, giving rival powers an opportunity to compete from a nearly fresh starting point. Germany, whose naval expansion was promoted by Kaiser Wilhelm II and Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, became Britain's most alarming challenger. Both countries poured money, steel and labour into battleships, while newspapers and political campaigns demanded still more construction. Designs grew rapidly. Larger guns, improved armour and better fire control systems allowed fleets to engage at distances that earlier commanders could scarcely have imagined. Battle cruisers carried battleship-sized guns but sacrificed armour in exchange for higher speed. Fisher intended them to scout, pursue enemy cruisers and avoid opponents they could not overpower. In practice, admirals sometimes placed them in the battle line, where their reduced protection could prove disastrous. The Great Confrontation came at Jutland on the 31st of May and 1st of June 1916. Britain's Grand Fleet, commanded by Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, met Germany's High Seas Fleet in the North Sea. British battlecruisers suffered catastrophic magazine explosions, while confused visibility, signalling difficulties, and cautious command decisions prevented either side from destroying the other. Germany inflicted heavier losses, but the strategic balance remained unchanged. The Grand Fleet continued to control access to the North Sea, and the High Seas Fleet never again sought a comparable full-scale engagement. The First World War also exposed the limitations of the battleship. Mines could deny it access to coastal waters, aircraft could locate it from above, and submarines could strike without warning. Germany's U-boats attacked Allied trade rather than attempting to defeat the Grand Fleet directly. Unrestricted submarine warfare threatened Britain's supply lines and helped bring the United States into the conflict. After the war, governments faced enormous construction costs and feared another naval arms race. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 limited capital ship tonnage, imposed a battleship building holiday, and established ratios among the leading naval powers. Several unfinished battlecruisers were cancelled or converted into aircraft carriers. These conversions hinted that the aeroplane might become more important than the heavy gun, although many admirals still regarded carriers as auxiliaries to the battle fleet. The Second World War would settle that argument. The aircraft carrier changed naval warfare by extending a fleet's striking range far beyond the horizon. Early carriers were converted from other vessels and operated relatively fragile biplanes, but arrestor wires, improved flight decks, and specialized aircraft gradually made operations safer and more effective. Carriers could conduct reconnaissance, defend a fleet from enemy aircraft, and attack targets that its guns could not reach. In November 1940, British aircraft flying from HMS Illustrious attacked the Italian fleet at Taranto. Despite using slow ferry Swordfish biplanes, the raid damaged 3 battleships and demonstrated that carrier aircraft could penetrate a defended harbour. Japan studied the operation while preparing its much larger attack on Pearl Harbor. On the 7th of December 1941, aircraft from 6 Japanese carriers struck the American Pacific Fleet, sinking or damaging numerous vessels. The United States carriers were absent, allowing them to become the core of its counter-offensive. Other events reinforced the battleship's loss of supremacy. HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse were sunk by Japanese land-based aircraft off Malaya in December 1941. In May 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea became the first naval battle in which the opposing carrier forces attacked without their surface ships sighting one another. The following month, American aircraft sank 4 Japanese carriers at Midway, while the United States lost USS Yorktown. Japan could replace ships more easily than the experienced aircrews and technicians killed with them, making the defeat particularly damaging. The U.S. Naval History and Heritage Command documents that the 3 American carriers involved supplied 234 aircraft. Battleships did not immediately become useless. They escorted carriers, provided anti-aircraft fire, bombarded shore positions, and fought occasional surface engagements. At Surigao Strait in October 1944, American battleships helped destroy a Japanese force in what is usually regarded as history's final battle between opposing battleship formations. Nevertheless, air power now determined where major fleets could operate. Beneath the surface, submarines conducted an equally important campaign. German U-boats attempted to sever Britain's Atlantic supply routes, operating in coordinated groups against merchant convoys. Allied escorts used sonar, radar, depth charges, and high-frequency direction finding to locate and attack them. escort carriers closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, while code-breaking and improved convoy tactics helped turn the campaign. The introduction of very long-range aircraft and roaming support groups contributed to the U-boat's heavy defeat in May 1943, as described by the Imperial War Museum's History of the Battle of the Atlantic. American submarines waged their own devastating campaign against Japanese shipping, sinking merchant vessels that carried the oil, raw materials and food required by Japan's war economy. By 1945, carriers and submarines had become central instruments of naval power. Battleships survived into the post-war era, but missiles, jet aircraft and nuclear propulsion would reshape the warship once again. The Cold War replaced the gun as the principal weapon of many warships with the guided missile. Radar-directed surface-to-air missiles defended fleets against aircraft. Anti-ship missiles allowed relatively small vessels to threaten larger opponents, and cruise missiles enabled ships and submarines to strike targets far inland. Naval combat increasingly depended upon locating an enemy, sharing information and launching weapons before the opponent could respond. The sinking of the Israeli destroyer Eilat by Egyptian missile boats in 1967 demonstrated the danger posed by anti-ship missiles. During the Falklands War in 1982, an air-launched Exocet struck HMS Sheffield, which was later lost. Such attacks encouraged navies to introduce layered defenses combining surveillance radar, electronic countermeasures, decoys, defensive missiles, and rapid-firing close-in weapon systems. Nuclear propulsion produced an equally significant change beneath the sea. USS Nautilus, the first operational nuclear-powered submarine, went to sea in 1955. Unlike diesel-electric submarines, which regularly needed to surface or use a snorkel, nuclear vessels could remain submerged for long periods and travel at high speed without refueling. Attack submarines hunted other submarines and surface ships, while ballistic missile submarines carried nuclear weapons as a hidden second strike force. The existence of these boats made anti-submarine warfare a central responsibility for surface fleets. Frigates and destroyers carried hull-mounted sonar, towed arrays, torpedoes and helicopters capable of searching large areas. Quiet machinery became crucial because a submarine or surface ship that could be heard could also be tracked. Warship hulls were shaped to reduce radar reflections, while exhaust systems and electronic emissions were managed to make vessels harder to detect. Modern destroyers and frigates are multi-purpose platforms rather than simple gunships. The American Arleigh Burke class combines the Aegis combat system, phased array radar and vertical launch cells capable of holding different missiles. Britain's Type 45 destroyers specialize in fleet air defense. Their Sea Viper system can launch 8 missiles in under 10 seconds and guide as many as 16 simultaneously, according to the Royal Navy's Type 45 specifications. Aircraft carriers continue to provide mobile air power, but they now operate at the center of groups containing escorts, submarines, and supply ships. Warships also conduct missions beyond conventional battle. They enforce sanctions, protect merchant shipping, counter piracy, evacuate civilians, and provide disaster relief. Amphibious ships transport troops, helicopters, and landing craft, while mine hunters keep ports and sea lanes open. No fleet can remain at sea without tankers, repair vessels, and supply ships, making logistics as decisive now as it was during the Age of Sail. Uncrewed aircraft, surface vessels, and underwater vehicles are creating another transformation. The war in Ukraine has shown that explosive-laden surface drones and shore-based missiles can threaten major ships even when their operator possesses no traditional battle fleet. At the same time, warships must defend against swarms of comparatively inexpensive drones without exhausting limited stocks of costly missiles. The modern warship is therefore becoming part of a dispersed network of satellites, aircraft, submarines, sensors, and remotely operated systems. Its weapons can reach farther than ever, but it is also vulnerable to threats arriving from the air, surface, shore, seabed, and cyberspace. From the bronze ram to the guided missile, the central contest has remained surprisingly consistent. Detect the enemy, maneuver into advantage, and strike before the enemy can strike back. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact History, part of the Compact Histories Network. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening so that you don't miss any future episodes. And consider leaving us a rating or a review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find new episodes at compacthistories.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, warfare, science, mysteries, true crime, and disasters. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/history and click on the coffee cup to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.